Good evening. My name is Stacy Floyd Thomas, and it is my distinct privilege to be the executive director of the Black Religious Scholars Group. This evening, you are experiencing something quite special. For the last 23 years, the Black Religious Scholars Group has met prior to the meeting of the American Academy of Religion and the Society of Biblical Literature, as we have sought intentional ways to bridge the gap between the Academy and the Black church. COVID-19 has changed that. And so now we're streaming into your living rooms, into your kitchens, into your cells, into your offices. And we're reaching far more perhaps than we ever have before. And that is one of the blessings perhaps that being virtual has brought us. And because of this spontaneous opportunity, we have decided that instead of just having one evening at one church to have a conversation among those who have assembled, that we would spread the word a little bit further. So not only for this evening, but for 5 other Fridays, we will be having a webinar that will look at the theme, Black Lives Matter, Making It Plain. And we are going to be calling these nights informally Good Fridays. For many of us who have been battered by the whirlwind of a bitterly contentious and painful, not only COVID-19 experience, but COVID-45 experience, we are reminded of the words of late religious historian and activist and former BRSG honoree Vincent Harding, that our struggles for social justice and human liberation exist at the crossroads of hope and history. This year's BRSG webinar series will focus on how Black religious leaders, scholars, and activists seek to encourage our faith communities to recover the resources from our past in order to rescue our present and even redeem our future. As various people across both the nation and the world are enduring immense horrors, hardships, and heartaches as a result of the current political and cultural climate in the United States, people of African descent are especially attuned to the pernicious, persistent oppression as a facet of one's daily existence. And I'm especially excited that in this first edition of talking about Black Lives Matter and making it plain with regards to people who are doing the faithful leading of Black institutions, this week is the Academy version, that I have not only 3 brilliant scholars, 3 brilliant ministers who are ordained, but 3 fabulous and faithful friends. Our first guest this evening is Reverend Dr. Stephen Ray Jr. Dr. Ray is the president of Chicago Theological Seminary, while also serving as a professor of theology, where he is broadly focused on systematic theology, African-American religion, human rights, and the intersection of race, religion, and politics. Dr. Ray is author of Do No Harm, Social Sin and Christian Responsibility, and the editor of We Have Been Believers, an African-American systematic theology, and co-editor of Awake to the Moment, an introduction of theology. Situating his leadership in the demanding urgency of Howard Thurman's thought to Mordecai Johnson, the call of my people need me. This embodies the way Dr. Ray leads and serves in his capacity as a current president, a past president of the Society of the Study of Black Religion. Last but certainly not least, I will also take the liberty and privilege to mention that President Ray has served on the executive committee of the Black Religious Scholars Group, and also co-authored with myself and the other members of that time, the book, the classic now, Black Church Studies, an Introduction. Next, we are fortunate to have the presence of the Reverend Dr. Teresa Fry Brown, who is a Bandy Professor of Preaching at Candler School of Theology, where she's also the first Black woman to obtain full professor in that institution's history. A well-known trailblazer in the development of homiletics, Dr. Fry Brown has published books on delivering the sermon, voice, body, and animation proclamation in African-American history and devotions, as well as avoiding a fixation, as well as a weary song and a weary throat. Dr. Teresa's work does not stop there, as she's been recently awarded the How Beautiful Are the Feet Award from the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference in 2020. And most especially a recent celebration. She's a second vice president, which makes her the president-elect for the Academy of Homiletics. It has also been a great pleasure to mention that Dr. Fry Brown has served as a triple threat within the Black Religious Scholars Group, in that she has been a griot, an honoree, and an advisor serving on the executive committee. Last but definitely not least, we have the Reverend Dr. Freddie D. Haynes III, who is the senior pastor of Friendship West Baptist Church, where he has been at its helm for 37 years, growing the membership to well over 12,000 members to date. A prophetic leader rooted in faith-based social activism, Dr. Haynes has been covered by the New York Post as a speaker at the Black Caucus Faith event at the Democratic National Convention, encouraging Democrats to take heed to the teachings of Jesus Christ, because a nation will be judged by how it treats the least. Presidents who deem to be or feign to be presidents contact him for his wisdom and his voice and his approval in moving forward. But also as an author, Dr. Haynes has written Rocking the World with Your Words, an essential guide to developing and delivering a life-changing message. But most importantly, Dr. Haynes is a co-founder and co-chair of our sister organization, the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, as it focuses on harnessing the transformative power of a cross-section of prophetic African-American faith leaders in their congregations in the United States and worldwide. We are blessed to have drum majors for social change and womanist wonders in our midst tonight. I ask that you open up your minds, you lend your hearts to the brilliance that will absolutely arrest you, so that you might go forth and see what the end's going to be. We're going to go in this order. We're going to start off with Dr. Ray sharing his thoughts, sharing his reflections on the theme for his role, not only as an ordained preacher and a theologian, but also as a president of an institution. Then we'll go with Dr. Fry Brown, who will talk about what it means to be not only a pioneer in womanist thought, and not only one of the most celebrated homileticians, but what it means to be at the helm of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, where she serves as this historic church's historian. And then we will have Dr. Haynes talk about what it means to be a pastor for the people and a drum major for social justice. Without further ado, Dr. Ray.
First, let me thank you for the wonderful opportunity to be here with you all this evening and to have the great joy of sharing some thoughts with you, but then also being connected with this critical work that BRSG has been doing for many years now. So I think the way I want to frame my remarks, at least initially, is that I want to say that what I'll be speaking about very briefly are some things that I'm doing specifically as a president of a theological institution. Now, why I want to take that vantage point is that one of the things that I'm very clear about, and I know that many of you are clear about, is that one of the primary engines of white supremacy within our society has not just been a sort of wayward Christian religion, but fundamentally unconstructed Christian theology, which has shaped the formation of many leaders, not only within our community, but those who affect and are connected with our community. So I'm going to begin my remarks by talking about transformation within theological education and how I'm doing that. And then I'm going to circle back around and talk about why I think that's so critically important. Because as I've stepped into this role, one of the things that I've tried to do is set aside my deep love for doing the work of theology to actually doing the work of transformation of institutions. So not simply being someone that counsels others who lead institutions, but actually transforms institutions. So the first thing I want to identify is what is the driving force that I understand to animate my work. And that comes from my understanding of Black theology, not simply as a discipline, but as a living, breathing way of engaging in ministry in the world. And one of the primary projects I understand to be connected with Black theology is breaking the bondage of the Christian tradition to white supremacy, both in terms of imagination and in terms of the material ordering of its life. So breaking the bondage of the Christian tradition so that it doesn't become a servant that continually reiterates the material relationships and the imaginative constructs that contribute to a world in which Black lives do not matter, but actually beginning to create some space for some transformation to go on that will allow the formation of religious leaders, Black, white, and every other color across the spectrum to be able to have an imagination that not only understands Black lives matter, but also to understand that the witness and creativity of Black communities is something that is a signal contribution that we can make not only to our society, but I think also very specifically to the church. In a conversation I was having last week, I was saying that not enough people recognize that the Black church as such, or Black church is actually God's gift to the church that has lost itself and has lost its true understanding of being a force for transformation. So now how am I doing that work? How is it that I'm engaging in the work in my role to begin to do this? Well, the first thing is I have two objectives. One is the normalization of Black people in theological education at every level of our existence. Now, what I mean by normalization is that virtually every institution of theological education has had Black people come and go. And some of them have done better jobs than others in terms of maintaining a presence, but in terms of the residual effect of our presence, very few institutions have changed because we have been present. Very few institutions have changed the way that they teach disciplines, have changed the way that they do development work, and that's fundraising, have changed the way that they've constructed their boards so that people have substantive roles and not just honorific roles, have changed the way that they shape their student bodies, and finally have changed the ways that they have creative relationships with living Black communities that are, one, full of creativity, but then two, material resources that can help contribute to the doing of theological education. So that's the first piece, the normalization of Black people, because we still live in a space where Black people are treated primarily as guests in someone else's house, are treated as a presence that will move through in a ghost-like way so that people will know we're present, but in terms of looking for specific fingerprints that are uniquely and distinctively ones that come out of the Black church tradition, as well as the creativity of the Black community. Far too many of our institutions don't do that. So that's at the center of my work, is to sort of create a Black presence that is enduring and that has an enduring fingerprint, because I think that that then allows us the space to do the kind of transformation that will create possibilities for the future so that we are not a presumed sideshow, but that we're actually at the center of what our organizations are doing. It's only then, I believe, that we can be about the work of constructing a new imagination that brings about a transformation. And when I talk about a new imagination, what I mean is not simply Black people being present and being connected at every level of the institution's life, but also the very being of Black people and Black communities doesn't become a social justice concern of some people in the organization. It doesn't become a connection to some group within, but it actually becomes the beating heart of institutions, that it actually becomes a part of the lifeblood of institutions. So the biggest piece then that I bring to this is that with that transformation, then theological education can deal and contribute to the issues that are facing Black people. And some of those issues we'll be talking about a little bit later are the questions that come up about how is it that we value Black lives in a world that seems like it doesn't value Black lives on the granular level. So I was talking a little bit earlier about how the COVID-19 crisis is going to affect our community in a way that it hasn't affected other communities, because it seems like the very nature of the virus has zeroed in on our well-being. So in that kind of world, what does theological education have to add? In a world in which all of our material relationships are structured in such a way that Black people are only ephemerally connected to the social goods and the wealth of our society in passing sorts of ways, so that each generation has to kind of make it up on our own. Getting theological education to shape leaders who are asking those questions and trying to find those questions and not putting them off in some center for Black church studies, or not putting them off in some center for African American studies, or not putting it off on one professor to be doing that work, but that the institutions themselves understand the formation of leaders for the 21st century to be grappling with these questions and building relationships with communities that can help find answers for these questions. So with that, I will pass it along. And once again, let me express my deep gratitude for being a part of this panel.
Thank you, Dr. Ray. Thank you, Dr. Stacey Floyd Thomas, for the invitation, and for Dr. Haynes being present also. So as an academic and a woman who is clergy, and also one that's a woman as scholar, but also I'm deeply, deeply invested for almost 70 years in Black churches, I was asked to talk about denominational leadership, womanist thought, and homiletics. And I'm not quite sure how to blend all those things together, but I will begin by sharing some thoughts around Black religious institutions, who in some ways have remained mythologically retrospective, thinking we're always the center of the community, but even during COVID-19, galvanizing in very strange ways Black life. And when we talk about Black life, I want to be very clear that I'm talking about all Black life, which means gender. And one of the things that I think that in denominational leadership becomes very important, that we have learned over this past year about living from being in a location to being online, prophetic witness over performance becomes important, being a community even in cyberspace. Denominational leadership is always variable. Sometimes it's autocratic, where it's just one person is running the whole show. Sometimes it is very denominationally led, depending on what's going on. There's always seems to be a pecking order, even at congregational churches. And so I think, how many times have Black women, however, been ostracized in the very institutions that they build? How Black women's bodies and intelligence and attire, marital status, abilities, gifts, and talents have been politicized, policed, and monetized in the name of what's best for the church. How is it that we have had our humanity at times canceled, sacrificing our life-threatening encounters for the sake of saving all the baby boys, because we treat them as if they're infantilized instead of knowing we're supposed to be equal in Black churches? So I talk about leadership. Dolores Williams said in Straight Talk, to examine one's faith is to begin to question authority. the symbols to symbols that create divisions of individuals within a social structure. Unexamined faith leads the people to unconscious instruments of their own oppression and the oppression of others. So we're going to examine the faith. We're going to examine this structure that we love called Black churches. I found it very interesting that we celebrated the Forever FLOTUS and the Madam Vice President, but we still have some cataracts about leadership and what it means to be a woman in a Black church. We're still asking questions and perpetrating stereotypes and questions that I faced 40 years ago when I entered ministry, while energizing people and say we're about social justice, but are we building more barriers inside while we're working on social justice outside becomes a question I think we need to attend to. Is there some superficial nod to women in leadership that we ordain women and then pigeonhole them into some church ministry? Vincent Harding says that you can get close, but not too high. And so as someone that is in a leadership position in the denomination, I keep watching this. There are a glut of social media posts about faces, that there are no women on flyers even today, that we're going to talk about women's bodies, but women aren't present, that we're going to talk about church leadership, but women are not present. What kind of theology is that? And why is it that we can have someone that paid for a certificate online that is thought to have more information than a woman that actually studied and has a degree? When we still have Black churches that are 75 to 95% of tithe-giving women in the pews, yet male leadership continues to ostracize and ghettoize women within the church. What are the positive things about Black religiosity? At the inception, there was an equality of roles and responsibilities of Black women and men, but now it seems that sometimes we're paralyzing predominantly white churches and non-Protestant faith communities, proudly proclaiming ourselves to be the bedrock of justice. We seem to be black-faced, white evangelical, gendered rhetoric and oppressive hermeneutic that attempts to engage in limited biblical hermeneutics. So what shall we do? Look at the history. Maria Stewart asked the question, a woman of the church, asked the question, how long shall the fair daughters of Africa be compelled to bury their minds and talents beneath a load of iron pots and kettles? How long will it be before we let women out of kitchens? How long will we recognize that women have kept the Black churches going? How long would it be that we can, till we do parity within the church, that we share in this leadership? Ella Baker says, you didn't see me on television. You didn't see news stories about me. That kind of role that I played was to pick up the people and put pieces and put them together, that I hope the organization might do. My theory is that strong people don't need strong leaders. The struggle is eternal. Where are our strong leaders within the church, within our denominations? We understand that in 2017, 32% of clergy that reported were women. In denominations, why aren't they leading some places? I had to struggle to find women that led churches of 1,000 or more people that are senior pastors. There are some, but they're not a lot. We understand that back to the 1800s, there were women working in Black Protestant denominations that were preaching, but could not hold a pastorate. In my own denomination, 2000 marked the year that we elected our first woman bishop. There have been 3 since then, and I'm a general officer, the first ordained general officer. But what about the other women? In the AME Zion Church is one person, in the CME Church is one person. In predominantly white denominations is where our women are being ordained and consecrated as bishops, but what about us? Yes, there's a small number of female bishops in other denominations, but why should I have to look for a list in 2021? It reeks of the stench of internal injustice, while ecumenical leadership conferences and panels boast that we are people that believe in justice. Denominational churches and women are pastoring churches where they've traveled over 300 miles just to preach. They become sanctified cleanup women, instead of having parity within the church. But there's hope. As a woman, as I always think, there's hope. We have to stop celebrating exceptionalism. We find one and that's all. One and done is what we've been doing. Instead of looking at the ways that we all have something to contribute to the vitality of Black denominations. How do we articulate justice if only the people benefiting are men? Behind the scenes, women are valorized as being woke. But how do we together engage in life and settle on things that we can all work together and stop setting up a litmus test of who has to lead, who has the sweetest hoop, who has to sacrifice the most, who produces, who's going to be remembered? Why do we keep genderizing a quality control of leadership, appearance, physicality, and status? Melissa Harris Perry said, sisters are more than the sum of their relative disadvantages. They are active agents who craft meaning out of their circumstances and do so in complicated and diverse ways. That's the beauty of denominations, of Black denominations, that we are diverse, that we are complicated, but we need to stop silencing each other, silencing voices, and eradicate the theft of ideas and attribute people for what they are doing, and stop silencing everything and working together. Complementarity, not competition. How do we critique each other in private and celebrate each other in public? How do we value the wisdom of everyone and not one person? How do we exegete what we are doing and stop pretending that everything is well within the church? How do we do as Shirley Chisholm said, service is the rent we pay for living on the earth. Miriam Wright Edelman said, service is the rent we pay for being. It is the very purpose of life, not something you do with your spare time. How can we work as allies, as partners in this thing that we call Black religiosity? In denominations, they were set aside because they only differ a little bit, but we're still people that we should be able to work together. The mothers of the church knew that in oral tradition, you had to keep things going. They said, you can't lead where you won't go and teach what you don't know. So we have to find a way to stop trying to mirror what somebody else is doing and get back to the rootage that is the beauty of Black church, that is the beauty of Black denominations, that we can save ourselves if we stop fighting with each other. If we stop trying to privilege one over another, then I think everything will be where it's supposed to be. That we can go back to funding schools and hospitals with day labor wages, coffee can stassage and side of bra SACE, that the congregations can be together. And denominational leadership is wonderful, but the higher you get, the more people want to tear you down. So how can we support people and celebrate what they are doing? How can we do that? We'll talk about that as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Wow, how powerful that was. Thank you so much, Dr. Teresa Fry Brown, for continuing to be the queen of homiletics. Thank you so much, Dr. Stephen Ray, for your invaluable contributions theologically to the ecclesiology of the Black church. Thank you so much, Dr. Stacey Floyd Thomas, for not only your wonderful friendship, but for your brilliance that continues to challenge and teach me. All of you, I salute you because of the fact that you have continued to provide a mirror, a theological mirror to the Black church so we can fix what we face. I want to deal with Black Faith Matters, pastoral leadership and social justice preaching, and piggybacking on what we have just been blessed and challenged by. I'm sure, like you, my blood boiled during the runoff for the United States Senate in the race between the incumbent Kelly Loeffler and the pastor of the spiritual home of Martin Luther King Jr., Raphael Warnock, there in Georgia. I was hostile because Loeffler used her wealth of resources to unleash a flurry of vicious attacks on Black faith and the Black church. She engaged with her right-wing colleagues in boogeyman politics and played on loop photos of the Reverend Dr. Jeremiah Wright Jr., James Cone, the father of Black liberation theology, was taken out of context. All of them, both of them, represent Black faith. Dr. Wright, as pastor of a Black church that has always been unapologetically Black and unashamedly Christian, Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago. Dr. Wright, a prophetic pastor who was vilified during the campaign of Barack Obama as his prophetic text were taken out of context for a political pretext that conned a gullible people, a gullible nation that was ignorant about Black faith and the Black church. Of course, Dr. James Cone, who wrote Black Theology and Black Power while he was at home in Arkansas during the summer, where he would write 12 to 16 hours a day in his brother Cecil's church office. And then on Sunday, he testified. He spent all day in church, feeding his mind and soul for the work he was doing in writing Black faith, Black power, and Black theology. That tradition, that Black faith tradition, was under attack through those vicious commercials that boogeyman politics during the recent runoff for the senatorial seat there in Georgia. And so it dawned on me that we need to take a fresh look at what it means to be the Black church, because we saw what happened when they came for the Black church and the Black church had not sent for them. Raphael Warnock is now the Reverend Dr. Senator Raphael Warnock, theological protege of James Cone, who was blessed by the womanist brilliance of Katie Cannon. And he's bringing that theological orientation and ecclesial foundation from Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, again, the church home of that drum major for justice, Martin Luther King Jr. I'm convinced there are challenges, lessons we can learn from what just happened in Georgia. I'm convinced that Black churches are now called upon to decide, are we going to be the Black church who exercise Black faith, or simply churches with Black people who give white evangelical theology a convenient Black face, because white evangelical theology infects our hermeneutic and then poisons our homiletic. Perhaps we should capture what birthed us and learn from the Black Lives Matter movement. In doing that, I think we should consider three things that continue to challenge, inspire, motivate me in the work I try to do, offering pastoral leadership and prophetic witness. Number one, I'd simply say to all of us that when we reconnect with Black faith has African roots that continues to bear fruit in pastoral leadership and social justice preaching. You see, Black faith aims for ma'at. That's that Egyptian term that speaks of harmony and justice and peace. There's no real way to translate ma'at into the English language. And so suffice it to say that when you think of ma'at, think of harmony, think of peace, think of justice, think of oneness, as it were. But not only ma'at, but Black faith, in aiming for ma'at, recognizes the power of what the Dogon people called nomo, the creative power of the word, the creative power of the spoken word. And so when Black faith aims for ma'at while recognizing the power of nomo, it also does this with an Ubuntu consciousness. Ubuntu, again, we don't have the wording to convey the meaning of Ubuntu, but we are helped by brilliant Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who basically connected it with an understanding of community and how community informs identity, and there is no identity without community, and you can't have community without individuals who are connected in their identity. And so Ubuntu, we are because I am, and I am because we are. So Black faith has African roots that continue to bear fruit in pastoral leadership and social justice preaching. Is that not what Black Lives Matter is all about? Without being blatantly spiritual, they are rooted in an African spirituality that says all Black lives matter. And you cannot fight for justice in the streets when you are practicing injustice in the sanctuary. There's something sick about a church with Black people, because you don't qualify for being a Black church. If you have no issues with women cleaning the pulpit, vacuuming around the pulpit, but they cannot stand and declare God's word, presiding over that pulpit. Black faith has African roots that continues to bear fruit, but it only bears fruit when all Black lives matter and when the justice that we fight for in the streets is reflected in how we treat one another in the sanctuary. But then Black faith delivered Jesus from white Christianity. Hallelujah. Black faith delivered Jesus from white Christianity. As a matter of fact, when you think about Black faith in her origins, that again don't simply stop during enslavement, but we see the manifestation of Black faith during enslavement, saving Jesus, delivering Jesus from a sick white Christianity. Black faith. We see Black faith. That sister, old Elizabeth, they called her, who was formerly enslaved. But once she was self-emancipated, she courageously traveled throughout the South to preach against slavery in the early 18th century, in the early 19th century. Thank God for old Elizabeth, because she was rescuing Jesus from white Christianity. Frederick Douglass went on to talk about how there is he found a dichotomy between the religion of Jesus Christ, the Christianity of Christ, and the Christianity of the overseer, the white slave owner. Frederick Douglass saw that because he was rescuing Jesus from white Christianity. Henry Mitchell put it like this in his wonderful book, Black Church Beginnings. He talks about the fact that the early Black church during enslavement, every Black preacher made it her or his business to transform their pulpit into a platform for abolition. They connected what was going on in the lives of the people who gathered in church with what was happening in their lives after the benediction. This is simply Black faith delivering Jesus from white Christianity. And then finally, Black faith unites in a holy wedlock, Jesus and justice, so that pastoral leadership and social justice preaching, they don't see a dichotomy between the pulpit and the pavement. They don't divorce spiritual anointing from social activism, because Black faith, here it is, Black faith understands that our theology must inform our sociology. I guess the best way to put it is that Black faith unites in a holy wedlock, Jesus and justice, and pastoral leadership recognizes, yeah, we have to feed the flock, but we also have to stand against systems of injustice in all of their forms, so that we become anti-oppressionist wherever we see oppression rearing its ugly head. I guess I'll close like this. I'm a preacher, so I got to close with an illustration. My beloved late grandfather, Frederick Douglass Haynes Sr., was the first African-American, while serving as pastor of the historic Third Baptist Church in San Francisco. He was the first African-American to run for county commissioner in the city and county of San Francisco. As he was running, he was met with so much hate. As a matter of fact, one of his deacons was in the post office, and when a white person there in liberal San Francisco found out he was a member of Third Baptist, he said to that deacon, he said, "Doesn't your pastor know, as a shepherd, it's his job to feed the sheep? He has no business running for public office." Oh, but that old wise deacon clapped back and said, "Oh yeah, our pastor feeds the sheep, but he also knows the job description of any good shepherd is to feed the sheep and fight the wolves." That's Black faith at its best, feeding the sheep and fighting the wolves.
Thank you so much. That is powerful. We're going to ask all the griots to come to the screen. We already have questions pouring in, and of course, there were some questions that came from our board members and our membership. But one of the resounding things that presented itself for me was the notion, I think that it was Dr. Fry Brown that brought it up. What happens when someone's taken out of context? That is a crisis for Black people, being taken out of context. And nowhere is that as evident when it comes to the issue of what Thurman would call head and heart, or what my colleague Dennis Wiley would say, when you get in the business of saving souls without losing minds and lives in the process. Black Lives Matter is an important topic because people have use of Black bodies, whether they're picking cotton, cleaning pulpits, being in the prone position, or playing ball. We love Black bodies. People have use of Black minds to appropriate from, whether it's postmodern scholarship, whether it's the genius of a homiletics, or whether it's a recipe. People, Black minds matter. But what does not matter are Black lives, because Black lives necessitate that Black people's minds, their hearts, and their bodies are brought together in a whole. So the first question we have, we've all heard, all four of us in this frame have heard, why are you going to seminary, from Black community people? Or the correlative question, why would you study Black history, Black theology, Black church studies, etc.? What about Black do you not already know? Our students are still bombarded with these questions, and then many of them end up going to predominantly white institutions where they're often shunned or held suspect because even there, within those white contexts, they're too religious, they're too spiritual, they're caught up in the frenzy, to use the Du Boisian term. So how do you engage your audience, your congregations, your colleagues, and the community, regardless of race, gender, or orientation, and realizing that we're called to love God with all of our minds, hearts, bodies, and souls? More importantly, how do you make it plain that saving our souls has everything to do with who we are, mind, body, and spirit? How do you do that? And however you will come, if you wouldn't mind engaging that question.
I will start with a question because of where I work. And I work at a PWI, and I've gone to PWIs, but I also understand that what was important for me is that my family taught me about who I was. So when I show up in a space that wants to commodify my body or deny it, I shift the atmosphere. I don't wait for the atmosphere to shift. I know my showing up means that there's someone else there. And so I don't have to come in with my head down. I don't have to apologize for being Black. If you can't see it, it's on you. And so I don't make myself small, was what I was taught by my parents and grandparents, right? I have rootage. I don't make myself small because someone else does not like me. And so the study of Black religiosity, the study of Black thought is, for me, as natural as breathing. And so I don't teach it where I am for the entertainment of white gaze. I teach it because that's who my lifeblood is. And I think that if it's not a permission asking task, it's just who you are, then that makes all the difference in the world.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
And I'll just add that I think that we have to be delivered from, I need to say before I even say that, Dr. Andre Johnson talks about how only history will help us to understand how much damage has been done to us by white evangelical theology. It has infected us. It has caused us to divorce those aspects of our being so that our minds are divorced from our hearts, our souls, and yet we serve a Savior who said he wants us to learn how to love God with the totality of our personality, with our heart, mind, soul, and strength. And so if I'm going to love God with my mind, if I'm going to love God with my heart, if I'm going to love God with my strength, I bring all of that to the question of, what about going to seminary? What about theological education? That is just an expression of me loving God. I love God enough to want to give God my best. And yet again, that white evangelical theology that infects us, it causes us to separate our minds. And so we lose our minds when we go to church, and we basically talk about, again, that insult, such as, are you going to that cemetery? No, I'm going to a place that's going to stretch my mind. I'm going to a place where I can, as Dr. T said, to bring my whole being into that educational experience. And so I think we have to get over a white evangelical theology, flush it out of our systems, and in the process recognize what Melva Costin said in her amazing book on worship. She talked about the fact that when you go to the African continent, this messed me up, Dr. Stacy, and that is, there is in African languages, there is no word for religion.
That's right. That's right.
No word for religion, because it's a part of everything. They don't divorce it. They don't put religion over here and then education over there. It's a part of who they are. It's a part of their identity. And so if we are going to walk in the power of identity, we must understand we've got to love God with the totality of who we are, and quit allowing the infection, the toxins of white supremacy that show up in white evangelical theology. I love what Renita Weems says. White evangelical theology is just white supremacy in disguise. And so we've got to be delivered from that. And once we're delivered from that, I think we will love God with all of us. And that means when I get my education, I'm loving God.
I appreciate that, Dr. Fry Brown and Dr. Haynes, as you all have talked about how you've done that as individuals. Dr. Ray, before you come in, I would like to contextualize that a little bit more because of your unique position, not only teaching and practicing faith within a predominantly white institution, denomination, but more importantly, because you lead a PWI. So what are some of the compromises you've had to make with the quotidian or daily practices of white supremacy in service to the larger structure of institutional transformation? Show what Dr. Fry Brown is doing in the classroom and what Dr. Haynes is doing in the pulpit and what both of them are doing denominationally and as activists, so it doesn't feel so schizophrenic, so that people might actually realize that in the 2/3 world, which is the majority of the world, don't call this stuff that's sacred religion. They call it life. How do you, as a Black man at the helm of a white institution, do this work so the atmosphere is changed by leadership rather than by individual faculty, students, or ministers?
Right. So thank you for that question. And also thank you to Dr. Fry Brown and Dr. Haynes for significant reflections. You know, the way that I understand my role now is understanding theological education to have two dimensions that are rarely available to Black religious leaders, right? The first is that what theological education does is that it forces a synthesis in a contracted period of time of people having to bring their full persons to synthesizing biblical studies, theology, pastoral care, and church history, right? Because you can't go through seminary and deal with one or the other. You have to learn how to deal with them all the time and deal with them in a contracted way. So in that regard, it provides an opportunity for people to be sharpened. Part of what the problem with theological education is that while this project is important, the questions that people are asking in many of these institutions, particularly PWI institutions, but also in some HBTI institutions, are really beside the point, right? So the question is, how do you force this synthesis in ways that raise relevant questions for the survival and thriving of Black people? So for me, as the head of a seminary that's related to a predominantly white denomination, and is a school that seeks to have significant racial, ethnic, and religious diversity, is number one, focusing the questions that we're trying to answer and focusing them in such a way that we don't self-understand ourselves to be a white liberal organization that is doing things for other people, right? That's trying to answer questions that they haven't asked, that is trying to mobilize ways of thinking that are really irrelevant to their material existence, right? The whole idea of bringing communities into the orbit of the institution, bringing people onto the board, bringing people into our donor base, bringing people as communities into our life, is to ensure that we lose the identity of doing things for others and actually have sufficient connection so that we're doing things for ourselves. And so that the questions that are being raised in terms of what kind of faculty people do we need? What kind of programs do we need? What kind of donors do I need to be looking for that's going to support particular kinds of work? That all of those questions then are ways that I do my work to deal with the exact issues that Dr. Hanson and Dr. Fry Brown were bringing up, because at the end of the day, my experience in theological education has been too often we allow those questions to be asked and we treat them as objects of study and not as subjective investments of our very being. So when I talk about the transformation of an institution is precisely to bring those into the center. Now, one of the ways, in terms of the quotidian ways in everyday, and quotidian just means every day, that white supremacy lives in theological education, not just my institution, is, and this might sound counterintuitive, but I don't do anti-racist work. Right? And the reason why I don't do anti-racism work is because that continues to maintain white issues of white supremacy at the center. Right? And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to decenter that and instead recenter it on questions that are relevant, that emerge from, and that can actually be answered by the creativity and the experience of Black people and a range of people and a range of diversities. So as a consequence, there are a lot of things that I just let go, and that there are a lot of things that I'm not going to exhaust myself or my presidency on, because at the end of the day, if you are not careful, you can spend so much of your time trying to deal with the quotidian, everyday expressions of white supremacy that when you leave this office, you leave an institution where the only thing you've done is brought in a carton of Band-Aids, and you really haven't done anything in terms of changing fundamentally the orientation of the institution so that it now becomes something different. So for me, the best anti-racism work is a transformed institution where Black people are normal and our creativity is part of the lifeblood of the institution.
I appreciate that. And while you were talking, Dr. Ray, it reminded me of something. Each one of you all are not only a part of my village, you are my friends. My daughter calls you all auntie and unkie and Papa Doc. And I realized that I met you in the word before I met you in the flesh. I met Stephen Ray was do no harm to me. Freddie Haynes was blow the trumpet at Zion. And Teresa Fry Brown was God don't like ugly. And just the tags and the titles of your books that the white presses allowed you to keep really speak to your ethic of transformation. And each one of you are always, and what drew me, obviously, because the title of your books spoke to my world, at my epistemology as an ethicist. Why do people do what they do? And how do they then order themselves with regards to their traditions and their commitments or what's sacred? And in taking things out of context, or as Dr. Fry Brown had said earlier, critiquing people in private and loving them into wholeness in public, I'd like you all to consider, given the long history of denominationalism, right, within the Black church tradition, and particularly the significance individual churches and the tradition has played in history. But the fact that, to speak to what Dr. Fry Brown made clear, it still don't like the whole body, which makes up 80 to 95%, right? How do we as Black church folk, right? How do we continue what's good about the tradition and cut off the atrophying muscle? How do we save the baby and get rid of the bathwater? If you all could talk to that. Dr. Fry Brown, maybe you might want to respond to that initially.
Since I'm a historian for a Black denomination, I will start with this. One of the things that becomes very clear is the AME, African Methodist Episcopal Church, did not start at the walkout. We were self-sufficient before. We had an organization that was taking care of our own. And there was much more parity then than when we got inside a building, which is a whole nother issue. But one of the things that becomes critical is that there's a plant called the epiphyte that grows in air, doesn't need any soil. Black churches need soil because that's where the nutrients are. And tradition is the soil. When it becomes traditionalism, it becomes pot bound. So one has to be careful not to become pot bound. When you live so much in the tradition, you cannot see God doing a new thing. That's where the difference comes. So I think you need the tradition. One of the themes that I use is history in the making. You have to know where you came from before you know where you're going. And so often we just act like we just started in air and nothing else happened. And I think that's why sometimes we don't have an idea about how we started, is how we keep messing up, throwing people under the bus, building higher and higher barriers between people, because when we didn't have a building, we worked together. And when we didn't know what white people were doing, we worked together. And so I think it's knowing that these things already existed. And when things are rotten to the core, yes, get rid of them. That's what pruning is all about. That's a biblical kind of mandate, I think. But it's knowing the origins of yourself and then questioning, why did I go pick up the habits of white people? Why did I think that their ice was colder? Why did I think that I had to now say, if you're a gay lesbian, you can't come in? If you're a woman, you have to only clean the toilets. If you're a child, you have to be quiet. That was not how we existed. We existed as family. We existed if every life was valuable. But as we, in my first book that you mentioned, talks about what we lost in integration.
There you go.
What we lost in integration was love for each other because we were trying so hard to be somebody we are not. And I think that when we understand that we are not white people, that we are people of blood, we are people that love each other, we don't have to do what everybody else does, then we can honor the tradition without being pot-bound traditionalists. That's what I wanted to say.
That's brilliant. But that brought another question to mind for me. And I saw Dr. Haynes doing this, so maybe he can come in. I'm thinking about the young people. We ask them, those who don't come to church, you're trying to compel them to come to church. YOLO, Doc, you only live once. And that's true. COVID has taught us that you only live once. You only have one life. And I'm looking at the three of you. I know the toll of being a Black religious leader. You have buried spouses, parents within the same season. You've done more funerals than you've done revivals, and you do revivals every week. You've had COVID in your own homes. Leadership is not a place where you make friends. You lose them. It's a place where you make enemies. And being a leader of religious institutions where people don't think religion is worth a dime, yet you're trying to raise money and keep people employed. Being a religious leader, I think, represents what the coronavirus is doing. We say, oh, okay, we go to these retreats, we have these beliefs, we have these platforms. These are just constructions. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but powers and principalities. The fact of the matter is, yes, race is a construction, right? We know that intellectually. But just like that, my daughter loves that commercial when it says, oh, you ran 10 miles today. Oh, but shingles doesn't, shingles doesn't care. Right? COVID doesn't care about racial constructions, right? Because the fact of the matter is, because as Dr. Ray had mentioned earlier in the conversation, Black people are more vitamin D deficient. Now, a lot, that might be part racially constructed because Black people are told to stay out of the sun because you might get Black. But we're vitamin D deficient, which makes us a target. Being Black is a comorbidity. It's just not having hypertension. It's just not having diabetes. Being Black, being vitamin D deficient, which most Black people are, is a target for COVID. Being a leader of a religious institution while Black is to get profiled, target, lose your family, if not your mind, if not your finances, if not your life. YOLO. Why do it? Why blow the trumpet at Zion, Freddie Haynes? Why choose to live within the Black community? Why choose when there's so many other jackleg mega church ministers who can pad their pockets by preaching to the coffers rather to the systems? Each one of you have talked about hope. Keep hope alive. And my good friend and colleague, Miguel de la Torre, says, you know what? I'm departing. He says, no, it's hopelessness. Because the fact of the matter is, people died in the wilderness. People are dying during COVID. Their press on and see what the end is going to be is over. Each one of us have had loved ones who have died while we've been leading. YOLO. Let's give me the benediction word and we can start off. Pastor Haynes, why do this? Why lead like this? It's because it creates a target and life is not certain.
Right. And I thank you for that. I almost flash back to William R. Jones, as God a white racist, when I think of all that we suffer from, and our Black skin is a pre-existing condition in this country that sets the stage for what we experience. And so the question is real, and yet I respond with the wisdom of Maya Angelou, who said, because you've been paid for. A price has been paid for you. A price has been paid. And of course, I could easily, run to the cross as a Black Baptist preacher. But Maya was, and I don't want to say going deeper than that, but she was reminding us of the fact that we are the evidence that we survive. We shouted this week to Amanda Gorman during her presentation on Wednesday. But I had to flash back to Maya Angelou, because Maya, when she gave her poem, she had this line that says, "We arrived on a nightmare praying for a dream." So nightmares, that's a part of our experience, our American experience, but there's always something in us that is praying for a dream. And so Maya also talked about when we thought the sun wasn't gonna shine no more, God put a rainbow in the sky. So there's always evidence out there that gives us hope, because we've been paid for. We've been paid for those who had hope in spite of the American hell. We've been paid for those who survived slavery when they could have easily given up. We've been paid for those who literally have saved a country that was determined to kill them. We've been bought and paid for by those who loved democracy when democracy was hating on them. And so because I've been paid for, I owe it to those who paid the price for me to keep on keeping on, because there's a daughter I have who deserves for me to keep on paying the price, just as the price was paid for me. And that price is always the down payment of hope that keeps me going in spite of this hell called America.
Thank you for that. Dr. Brown, Dr. Ray.
Well, I think that certainly for me, in terms of it is, I'm going to start with just a very simple idea, right? The reason why I continue to do this work, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what I understand to be the work, is because I know Jesus for myself. And so that becomes the animating force in my life.
Yes, sir.
But in terms of the work, I mean, as you were setting this up, one of the things that I have to make clear to people every now and then, Dr. Floyd Thomas, is that doing work as a theologian in PWIs, doing work as an administrator in PWIs, for me is not a step up, right? I'm doing this as my answer to a call, because there's a way that I could be doing just fine in the Black church, that I could be doing well in the Black church. But for me, a part of understanding the Black church as being God's gift to a church tradition that is in bondage to white supremacy, and God's gift as a force to bring a reckoning with that bondage, that's a part of what I understand the work to be. Because you're right, I mean, in terms of all of the stresses and struggles that we have to deal with. But if I'm going to, in the midst of it, as you know, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Calvinist, so I understand the world to be a sinful and fallen place. If I'm going to do the work of a God of life in this place, then what that means is that we are called to do the redemption of these institutions that have created the very conditions of our bondage, because that's creating the possibility for freedom. And the cost of it is just the one that we have to bear. So, folks used to talk about we all have our crosses to bear. And, I love what I'm doing. I love my school more than I can say. I love my students, my faculty. But the one thing that I'm clear about is I'm not there because I think it has been a step up for me. It has been an answer to a call for me to bring everything I understand to be about the creativity, the strength, wisdom, and vision from the Black church tradition in this work of breaking the bondage of the Christian tradition to the ghost of white supremacy, and thereby creating a new world.
Dr. Fry Brown, before you speak, got an interjection from my brother Keith Jossell. And it seems like he's standing at the cross. And he says, it's so hard doing this work when there are Black faces like yours that validate white supremacy, making it lonely and almost impossible for you to climb. It's frustrating. How do you practically confront and keep going? And I would add, as you stand at the cross and realize that even the rock and your disciples have left and sold you out.
That's my question, right?
That's your question.
That's my
And I
question.
know you can answer it.
I stand at the cross because the ground is level there. I stand there because the ground is level there. Nowhere are we promised that people that look like us are going to protect us or think like us or make a way for us. Nowhere was it promised that. That's some big comic that we made up in our head, because people are individuals. The melanin may be the same, but that doesn't mean that they believe what we believe. So yes, it's going to be difficult. Why do I keep doing this in the academy? Because I grew up with people who could not read and people that could, and said that was the way for you to get someplace. That it's the life of the mind that becomes critically important. And my mother taught me that they cannot take out what's in your mind. So I keep trying to help people put things in their mind, because it's the only place that white people can't get to. And it scares the hell out of them when you have something between your ears and they don't know what's going on. That's why I keep doing the academy. That's why I keep writing, even when they slam doors in my face, say I'm not able to get a particular position. You know what I'm talking about. But God will eventually get me to where I'm supposed to be in the academy. In the church, because I happen to have breasts, there are some times that they think are only for suckle and not for any kind of leadership. So I stayed there because there were too many women that couldn't be where I am right now. When people said I couldn't preach, God said preach anyway. When people said I couldn't be an officer, God said do it anyway. And so because my allegiance is not with the people, they just walk with me. My allegiance is with God. So it may not be the cross, but nowhere does it say we're not going to have people that will be traitors. Nowhere does it say people will not spit in your face, cuss you out. It doesn't say that anywhere. But God is the only one that pulls me through it. And so I try to tell young people, you may think it's easy, but there's a whole lot of people that didn't get even one step to where we are. As Fannie Lou Hamer said, every day when I leave the house, I don't know if I will return, but if I fall, I'll be 5'4" closer to the cause of freedom. That's why I keep doing what I'm doing. And that's why everybody should keep doing what they're doing. Mm-hmm. That's my word.
Mm-hmm.
This has been a good Friday indeed. You all have made it plain while giving us substance for the rest of our journey. We thank you, the gathered audience, for you to be here to listen from these wise people who have given us a different type of holy day, a different type of epiphany, by making it plain that we can do the work of head and heart, and that 2 or 3, when gathered, when they touch and agree, their divine things happen and resurrection is possible. So we want to ask that you meet us again next Friday at the same time, where we will be engaging our moderator, Brandon Crowley, who will be meeting with some millennial preachers and talking about the new Black church tradition. I would be remiss if I did not say thank you to those who provided funding and support, all of the institutions of the ministers and scholars who are present here, but also the Public Theology and Racial Justice Collaborative, Boston University School of Theology, Chicago Theological Seminary, Christian Theological Seminary, Earlham School of Religion, Duke and Bright Divinity School, Seminary of the Southwest, Yale University Divinity School, Princeton Theological Seminary, Union Presbyterian Seminary, Virginia Union University, Union Theological Seminary, Covenant Baptist Church, the historic Myrtle Baptist Church, Congdon Street Baptist Church as well. If you are interested in sowing seed into this wonderful work, please do so. You can cash app at $, the BRSG INC, or I know that there's a PayPal. I think that is also the BRSG INC at gmail.com. That will be shown on a slide. We thank you again, our institutional sponsors, our fabulous panelists, but most importantly, you, the gathered audience that found it not robbery to find your way to the level ground at the cross. Until next time, thank you.